At 6:10 a.m., San Diego's light felt too bright for what waited inside my apartment. I'm Ivy Tran, 31, a product designer who schedules life in color-coded blocks. I had saved, planned, and prepaid $8,000 for a family vacation villa, flights, everything logged in a blue fireproof folder. 2 days earlier, I'd slid my passport in a red sleeve into the front pocket and slept easy. Morning ritual, then one last check before rolling my suitcase to the door. The folder lay where I'd left it, the pocket did not, empty. No passport, no reassuring weight, just air and the sudden hollow rush that makes hands go cold. I retraced steps. I scanned surfaces. I opened drawers I hadn't touched all week. Nothing. The group chat pinged with reminders about pickup at 9 and the usual parental certainty that the plane would leave with or without me. My mother, Evelyn, had always worshipped itineraries. My father, Patrick, preferred lectures about responsibility. My sister, Naomi, somehow lived exempt from both. It was supposed to be the trip that softened old patterns. Instead, a document the size of my palm had turned me into the problem. I checked the fireproof bag, the carry-on, the coat pockets I never use in San Diego's heat. I looked in absurd places, the freezer, the shoe box under beach towels, because panic begs for long odds. The clock kept moving. The SUV downstairs did too. Later, I would learn where the passport went. 3 days after the plane took off, a photo would arrive from Naomi, smug and heavy with implication. But in that hour, disbelief hardened into something else. A resolution to redraw every boundary I had let blur. By noon, the next step would require steel, brass, and a receipt with my name on it. If this opening struck a nerve, tell us your take. What would you do if your passport vanished hours before a family trip? Like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more true-to-life family drama and revenge stories. By noon, the stillness in my apartment began to press against my skin, like heat trapped behind glass. I moved from room to room, the air heavy with something that wasn't quite silence, more like accusation. Every surface looked too clean, too intentional, as if someone had been careful to erase their presence. I scanned again, not for what was missing, but for what didn't belong. That's when I saw it. A lavender hair tie coiled near the top of my closet shelf, its silver charm glinting like a quiet confession. Naomi's hair tie. She had never been here. My stomach tightened around the realization. The space that once felt like safety now vibrated with trespass. I took photos of the shelf, the item, the time on my phone, small pieces of proof that my memory wasn't lying. My mind began to reorder the morning. The vanished passport wasn't lost, it had been removed. I opened my laptop, hands unsteady. A checklist appeared in my head: locks, accounts, access, action over panic. Searching online for emergency locksmiths, I found one offering same-day service. The name Rick Doyle sounded practical, solid, someone who knew the weight of metal and privacy. I booked him without hesitation. While waiting, I opened my email client. A faint unease I hadn't noticed before took shape in the inbox. Financial updates that should have triggered notifications were missing. I scrolled through filters and found one that redirected anything with bank, statement, or account straight into archive. I hadn't set that up. The timestamp showed 3 weeks earlier. My pulse slowed, not from calm but calculation. Whoever had entered my home knew how to enter my digital life too. The combination made me feel suddenly transparent, like my entire existence was a pane of glass in someone else's hand. The doorbell broke the tension. Rick's arrival felt almost ceremonial, the sound of metal tools, the smell of machine oil, the rhythm of locks being replaced. I watched each turn of his wrench as though he were sealing a wound. When he left, I held the 2 new keys with the reverence of someone relearning ownership. Still, security wasn't peace. I opened the government portal for passport assistance, explaining the loss and my imminent travel. The response came in measured politeness. Without proof of immediate departure, there would be no expedited replacement. The trip had already left. The system had no sympathy for what had already happened. Bureaucracy was never built for betrayal. I closed my laptop and leaned back, letting the quiet return. The afternoon light had shifted softer but indifferent. It didn't care that my family was crossing time zones without me, or that my bank's safety net had invisible holes. The only certainty left was this apartment, the perimeter I had redrawn. I began writing a list in my journal: passwords to change, institutions to contact, belongings to secure. Each line felt like an anchor dropped into the chaos. I was no longer searching for a passport. I was documenting a breach. When I finally exhaled, I realized I had stopped shaking. Beneath the exhaustion, there was an undercurrent of defiance. Someone had taken my trust, turned it into a puzzle I hadn't agreed to solve. But puzzles have patterns, and patterns always lead somewhere. The phone buzzed. A notification pulsed across the screen, a message from Naomi. The preview line showed only 5 words, casual but heavy enough to pull the breath from my chest. Why are you changing your locks? The question wasn't curiosity, it was confirmation. Night arrived like static, faint but persistent, spreading through every corner of the apartment. I sat in front of the laptop, the new keys placed beside the trackpad, a quiet symbol of defense that suddenly felt small. The glow from the screen cast a blue outline across my hands, steady now, deliberate. I opened the system logs, not out of curiosity but necessity. Within seconds I found it, a remote access session, 47 minutes long, recorded 3 weeks earlier. Files opened, renamed, closed again. Every action methodical. I scrolled further, tracing the digital fingerprints of a ghost who clearly wasn't guessing. The cursor paused on a folder labeled Finances. A chill ran through my chest, not from surprise but recognition. Whoever had entered knew exactly what to look for. And there was only one person who would know where I stored bank statements, tax records, investment data, someone who had watched me organize them for years. The thought of Naomi felt corrosive now. It wasn't anger, it was clarity sharp enough to hurt. I had always considered her impulsive, not calculated. But that assumption had blinded me to possibility. Jealousy rarely acts alone, it learns precision when it wants to wound. I minimized the logs and opened social media, searching her name as though it were a password to understanding. The feed unfurled with curated smiles, brunch tables, selfies in soft light. Then I saw the post 3 weeks old, timestamp aligned with the breach, captioned, "Big changes ahead." In the photo, Naomi sat across from a man in a tailored suit. On the table lay a branded folder with the logo of my financial advisory firm. My breath stalled. Sean Kim. He had been my advisor for years, meticulous and careful, not the type to meet strangers. The image cut through the last thread of denial. Naomi hadn't stumbled into my data, she had walked into it with intent. I pulled up the contact list, found Sean's professional email, and typed a short message requesting confirmation of any recent meetings under my name. The send button felt heavier than it should have. While waiting, I opened the drawer containing old documents and began cataloging what could have been copied or photographed insurance papers, credit slips, my grandmother's inheritance documents. Everything was potential evidence now. Minutes later, a reply appeared. Polite. Formal. Yes, there was a visit last month. Someone presenting power of attorney on your behalf. My lungs forgot how to function. A forged signature was one thing. An official document authorizing access to my finances was another. It meant she had planned this in layers: physical intrusion, digital entry, and now financial impersonation. I copied the email into a new folder labeled Proof. Then another for Timeline. My actions felt detached, as if someone else was steering my body. Control had shifted from panic to documentation, from disbelief to evidence. Revenge wasn't born out of fury, it grew in the soil of precision. I turned off the lights, leaving only the screen's dim reflection. The apartment looked smaller, compressed by secrets it hadn't agreed to hold. Outside, the coastal wind pressed against the window, steady and indifferent. Somewhere across an ocean, Naomi was probably laughing in a cafe, secure in the illusion that distance made her safe. But distance is an illusion too. Technology collapses it, evidence erases it. I gathered screenshots, timestamps, message headers, photo links, everything that stitched her presence to my digital life. Each file was a line drawn sharper than the last. When the clock touched midnight, exhaustion met resolve in a strange equilibrium. I wasn't chasing recovery anymore. I was building a record, one that would outlive any denial. Then the phone vibrated once, lighting the dark room with a small, cruel glow. A new message previewed across the lock screen. A photo: first my missing passport on a marble counter, her hand in frame, painted nails unmistakable. Then text beneath it: found it. For a moment the world narrowed to a single point of heat behind my eyes. She hadn't hidden it from forgetfulness, she had hidden it for sport. The evidence was complete, but something deeper shifted. I wasn't the helpless sister she remembered. The locks had changed, and so had I. Morning arrived thin and pale, the kind of light that doesn't comfort it, just exposes. I brewed coffee I couldn't taste and opened the document folder labeled Proof. The screen filled with screenshots, bank logs, emails, timestamps. Evidence was no longer abstract. It was numerical, undeniable. Each file represented a fracture I hadn't seen forming. The image of my passport, her manicured fingers holding it, still burned at the edge of my vision, a cruel signature confirming everything I'd refused to believe. The first task was simple: call the financial institutions, one by one, to verify control. The responses varied, some polite, some concerned, but the result was consistent: attempts at recent access. Each attempt had failed because I had changed credentials hours earlier. She had been trying even from abroad. The precision of it made me feel less like a victim, more like a target. Next, I documented every point of contact, every reference to my name that didn't come from me. In a world built on digital footprints, deletion didn't exist, and that truth suddenly worked in my favor. My research background helped. Pattern recognition became survival. I created a spreadsheet tracking unauthorized actions, linking them to probable dates of intrusion. The pattern aligned with Naomi's online activity almost perfectly. By midday, my decision was made. Revenge wasn't going to be loud or impulsive, it would be lawful, traceable, and final. I searched for attorneys specializing in identity theft and family fraud, and the name Patricia Chen appeared among the top results. Her profile photo radiated quiet certainty, the kind that came from decades of precision rather than aggression. I sent a detailed summary and attached the digital evidence, hitting send with the kind of calm that follows exhaustion. While waiting for a reply, I opened my journal and wrote a single sentence across the page. She underestimated the quiet ones. The ink bled slightly, but it felt deliberate, as though the words themselves were anchoring the next move. The reply from Patricia arrived sooner than expected: a meeting available the next day, remote consultation. The confirmation email listed the necessary documents, all of which I had already gathered. Preparation had replaced panic. Organization was its own weapon. Afternoon blurred into evening as I compiled a physical binder mirroring the digital folder. Every photograph, every log entry, every forged signature had a place, protected in plastic sleeves. Order had always been my refuge, and now it was also my defense. I paused to glance at the family group chat, still muted. Their messages had stopped days ago. No apologies, no explanations. Silence had become their shield. But silence is porous. It leaks meaning. I saw it for what it was: not guilt but calculation. They were waiting to see how much I would let go before they returned. They had mistaken distance for safety again. They didn't know that the same distance now gave me clarity. When the call from Patricia finally came, her tone was calm but direct. She confirmed what I had begun to suspect. Naomi's actions weren't a misunderstanding, they were criminal. Forgery, unauthorized access, financial impersonation. Each carried real weight under U.S. law. Patricia advised formal documentation and a police report. A case file could begin within days, with or without family cooperation. I thanked her, though the gratitude felt mechanical. Ending the call, I sat for a long time staring at the wall, realizing that justice had a different rhythm than revenge. Justice didn't shout. It documented, filed, and waited for signatures. That night, I printed copies of the most incriminating pieces: her photo with my advisor, the email from Sean, the message of the passport. I sealed them in a manila envelope addressed to Patricia's office. The act felt less like preparation and more like purification. Each page reduced the weight on my chest by a fraction. Before bed, I checked my phone. One new notification from Dad Patrick, a single unread text. "We're worried about you." The irony almost made me laugh. Concern only arrived when control was slipping from their hands. I didn't open it. Concern wasn't the same as remorse. The apartment lights dimmed, the binder closed, and for the first time in days, I felt sleep pull me downward, not as escape, but as armor. Tomorrow would begin with signatures, not apologies. Tomorrow would belong to evidence, not emotion. And when they returned from their perfect vacation, they wouldn't find the daughter who waited. They'd find documentation stamped, notarized, irreversible. The evening their flight landed, the city felt oddly still, as if it were holding its breath for me. I had spent the last hours preparing the apartment not with anticipation, but precision. The documents lay organized across the dining table, the binder open to the final section marked liability. A copy of the police report rested on top, its date stamped in black ink that no apology could erase. When the phone vibrated, I didn't reach for it. The notifications lined up in a silent queue: calls from Evelyn, one from Patrick, two from Naomi, each carrying a weight that no ringtone could soften. I muted the screen and returned to my notes. Timing mattered now. I wasn't waiting for their explanations. I was waiting for them to see what had already been set in motion. The first sound came hours later. Footsteps in the hallway, voices filtered through the door, the kind of hesitant, quiet families use when approaching disaster. I didn't move. The doorbell rang, a long, insistent tone that seemed to measure endurance. I let it echo, then fade. Another ring, another pause. Finally, silence again, the sound of realization settling in. The locks had changed, access denied. Behind the steel and wood, I imagined their faces, the confusion shifting into indignation, the disbelief that I had acted before they could control the story. For years, their approval had been currency. Tonight, it was worthless. The folder labeled Statement of Damages sat ready beside the evidence. It contained the formal request for reimbursement, $8,000 for the trip I never took, legal fees, and compensation for identity interference. Patricia had helped me calculate everything. There was nothing emotional in the numbers. They were simply accurate. Facts could be crueler than anger. I pictured Naomi standing there, suitcase in hand, expecting a version of me she could still manipulate, a sister seeking closure. She wouldn't find that person here. The report had already been filed under her full name, Naomi Tran, cross-referenced with financial documentation and digital logs. In the eyes of the law, she wasn't family, she was a subject. As night deepened, I watched from the window. The reflection showed my own face, still, measured, unrecognizable from the person who once needed their validation. Down on the street, their car idled for a moment longer before pulling away. No banging, no shouting, just quiet retreat. They understood now. Control had migrated. Later, I drafted a brief email to Patricia, confirming that contact had been attempted and boundaries had held. She replied within minutes, her professionalism oddly comforting. The process would continue, formal statements next, possible civil action after review. Each step was deliberate, irreversible. When the apartment fell silent again, I walked through each room, checking locks, closing drawers, grounding myself in the tangible. The stillness didn't feel empty anymore. It felt earned. On the counter, the police copy remained open to the section titled Restitution Options. The language was clinical, detached. It spoke of consequences, not revenge. Yet reading it, I understood something simple. Closure doesn't arrive with forgiveness, it arrives with accountability. I placed my grandmother's old fountain pen beside the report, a small reminder of inheritance, of the life I had built without their oversight. For the first time, that inheritance felt entirely mine, untouched by guilt or obligation. Before turning off the lights, I opened my laptop one last time. The evidence folder, now backed up in multiple drives, felt like both armor and obituary, the death of the version of me who tolerated being diminished. Outside, the Pacific wind pressed faintly against the window panes. Somewhere across the city, my family was likely rehearsing explanations, trying to decide who would break the silence first. They would find no audience here. Silence, once my prison, had become my verdict. I closed the laptop, turned the key in both locks, and allowed the apartment to fall into perfect darkness. The evidence was filed, the message delivered, and the boundaries no longer negotiable. Tomorrow, the paperwork would move forward, the restitution request entering its next phase. But tonight, justice existed in its simplest form: absence. Weeks folded quietly into months, not with peace but with precision. Life resumed its rhythm, yet nothing returned to its original shape. I still woke early, brewed coffee, opened my laptop, but every action now carried intention. There was no space left for uncertainty. The investigation had taken on its own momentum, guided by Patricia's measured updates. Evidence had evolved from suspicion to prosecution. The first notice arrived in mid-morning mail, a thin white envelope stamped with the county seal. Inside, a formal acknowledgement from the district attorney's office, case number assigned, identity fraud pending review. The language was neutral, bureaucratic, yet I felt its weight like an anchor dropped through water. It was official now. My sister's name existed in a system that didn't recognize bloodlines, only evidence. Naomi's consequences began subtly. Her employer verified the subpoena that froze her payroll records. Then came the bank notifications, the flagged transactions, the inevitable suspension of accounts. The echo of her previous entitlement unraveled one form letter at a time. What she had taken from me could be calculated. What she lost couldn't. My parents tried to mediate through silence again, as if withdrawal could rewrite the facts. But silence has a lifespan, it expires under paperwork. When the legal correspondence reached them as co-signers on one of Naomi's fraudulent forms, their names joined the investigation's margin. It wasn't criminal liability, just collateral discomfort, the kind that lingers long after signatures dry. I didn't gloat. There was no satisfaction, only completion. Justice is a strange mirror, it reflects truth without warmth. Watching it unfold felt less like victory and more like balance restoring itself after years of imbalance. By the second month, Patricia's updates carried a rhythm of inevitability. Formal charges approved, arraignment scheduled, court date pending. Each email arrived like a page turning in a story I hadn't realized I'd been writing. I saved them all, not out of obsession, but preservation. One afternoon, I returned from work to find a notice taped to the door, a certified copy of the restitution order. The document listed the total, reimbursement, damages, and penalties. The sum was exact, down to the cent. It included the trip I never took, the stolen access, the emotional labor quantified by the system. The law couldn't return the version of me that existed before, but it validated the one that came after. I placed the notice in the binder beneath the section marked resolution. There was still no contact from them, and I didn't expect any. Consequences rarely announce themselves, they just continue. I imagined Naomi's days shrinking inside procedural limits, court appointments, financial audits, hours of explaining what could never sound like misunderstanding. In that narrow space, she would finally meet the truth she had created. Sometimes at night, I would think about the word family and realize how small it had become, how defined by boundaries rather than bonds. What remained wasn't love or hate. It was distance, clear and non-negotiable. I had rebuilt something stronger than forgiveness: autonomy. Weeks later, Patricia informed me that restitution had been processed. Funds were transferred directly to my account under state supervision. It appeared on my banking dashboard without ceremony, a line of numbers quietly correcting the imbalance. I didn't celebrate. I just closed the app and made dinner, the way ordinary people do after extraordinary storms. News reached me eventually through a neighbor who had once known Naomi. She had moved back in with our parents after losing her apartment. Her credit score had collapsed, and so had her reputation. My parents' retirement savings, once untouchable, now carried liens for unpaid legal costs. Actions have gravity. They pull everything attached down with them. And still I felt no triumph, only certainty. There was no need to punish further. The world had already done what I couldn't make consequences permanent. In the quiet that followed, I redecorated my apartment. New locks, new art, softer light. Not because I feared intrusion, but because I wanted the space to look like mine again, clean of ghosts. My passport, freshly reissued, rested in a drawer by the window, untouched since its arrival. I could travel anywhere now, but for the first time, I didn't feel the need to escape. The greatest revenge wasn't distance, it was stability, the absence of chaos, the peace of boundaries honored. Months later, a final letter from Patricia arrived, case closed, restitution satisfied, no appeals filed. I folded the letter, slid it into the binder, and placed it on the highest shelf. Closure didn't require forgetting, it just needed documentation. Standing by the window, the city lights shimmered like quiet witnesses. I thought of everything I had lost, and realized none of it compared to what I had reclaimed: ownership of my life, unshared, undiluted. For the first time in years, the silence wasn't punishment, it was freedom. The quiet never felt heavy again. It had texture now, soft, breathable, deliberate. The world had stopped spinning around the axis of their choices, and for the first time, the air in my apartment belonged entirely to me. Morning light crossed the room in measured bands, touching the corners where fear used to sit. I didn't rush anymore. Time had learned my pace. Routine became ritual. Coffee brewed without hesitation, emails answered without the tremor of waiting for someone else's approval. The word family no longer occupied the center of every sentence in my life. It was a fragment, not a foundation. What replaced it wasn't loneliness, but clarity. The binder stayed on the top shelf, sealed now beneath a simple label: closed. I didn't touch it, but I never hid it. It was proof of both loss and recovery, the border between who I had been and who I chose to remain. Justice had done its work. Healing had begun in the silence that followed. Some days, I walked by the ocean, where the wind carried conversations I didn't have to answer. Watching the tide withdraw and return taught me something subtle: retreat isn't surrender, it's rhythm. The sea knows how to let go without losing itself. I had to learn the same. Patricia's final email had come weeks ago: no pending motions, no appeals, no loose ends. It felt strange how closure arrived not with an ending, but with absence. Nothing left to fix. No one left to convince. The echo of that realization still lingered, but softer each time. I hadn't seen Naomi or my parents since the legal resolution. Occasionally, their names appeared in the periphery of social spaces, comments on mutual acquaintances' photos, mentions in community newsletters, but they no longer triggered reaction. They were context, not consequence. Forgiveness never entered the equation. It wasn't necessary. Forgiveness implies debt, and I had already balanced every account. What remained was acceptance, the kind that doesn't excuse but understands the limits of others. People act from the edges of their own fear, and sometimes, those edges cut, but I learned how to stop bleeding. Rebuilding didn't mean forgetting. It meant redesigning. I took a new position at the university, one that valued results over connections. My name appeared alone on published research, unshared, unclaimed. Seeing it in print carried a quiet power, the kind that comes from finally standing in your own shadow and not someone else's. The apartment reflected that evolution. New plants, muted colors, a photograph of the ocean pinned near the desk. Nothing extravagant, just evidence of presence. Evenings were marked by peace, the kind earned, not granted. Sometimes I wondered if Naomi ever thought of me if she felt regret or just consequence. But the thought no longer stung. It passed through me like wind over water. Regret is only meaningful to the one who feels it. One Sunday, I sat on the balcony, watching people pass below, families, laughter, fragments of lives continuing. I didn't envy them anymore. Comparison had been the first form of imprisonment I'd learned, and freedom meant ending it. My life was quieter, smaller maybe, but honest. And honesty had a strange way of expanding space. There's an illusion people hold that justice and peace arrive together. They don't. Justice closes the wound. Peace teaches you to live with the scar. I carried mine openly, not as a mark of shame but as evidence of survival. That night, I wrote the last entry in my journal. You cannot lose what you stop chasing. The ink dried slowly, as if reluctant to end. I closed the notebook and left it on the windowsill, where the moonlight turned its cover silver. The city hummed below, unaware, unjudging. In the reflection on the glass, I saw myself not as the betrayed sister, not the daughter they failed to defend, but the woman who built her own resolution. The silence that once crushed me now stood beside me, protective, patient. Freedom didn't look like escape. It looked like stillness without fear. Tomorrow would arrive like every other day, not with vengeance, not with regret, but with the steady certainty that I had finished something that once consumed me. And in that final calm, I understood what revenge had really been about. It was never destruction. It was reclamation.